It's Brian Preston, the Money Guy.
For those of you that are in your 20s and you are going through this recession, this is kind of new territory. You've likely not experienced this before. So a lot of this, you're thinking, this is sort of uncomfortable, not good, sort of scary territory.
Yeah, I mean, to put it in context, I think the full last recession we had, that I think everybody agrees, full recession, the Great Recession of 2008, that means people in their 20s, you guys were between the ages of 6 to 15.
Probably not paying a ton of attention
to the broad economy. So this is probably going to feel really new to you in a lot of aspects, and that's why I think it's very important to kind of really breathe it all in, because you're getting a really big education on how to handle both the analytics as well as the behavioral sides of recessions.
And one of the things that Brian told me when I went through my very first recession back in 2008, he said, Bo, look, bottle this up. Remember the way that you're feeling, what you're thinking, and how you're experiencing this, because there's a very real likelihood that what is going on right now in the world will have a big impact on the way that you view the financial world. You talked about, Brian, you came out of college in the mid-90s, right before the dot-com bubble really started taking off, right before markets were making like 28% annualized year over year. It was an exciting time to be an investor. So that has kind of influence your investment philosophy. Me, I came out of college in the mid-2000s. Right there, 2008 was one of the very first financial markets that I saw. So I just assumed the market was always red. It was always going down. It was always negative. What you experience early on in your career likely has an imprint or an impact on the way that you're going to view the rest of your career and the other markets that you go through.
So what I just heard you say is, Brian, since you graduated in the 90s, you're a natural optimist.
You're a natural optimist. That's right.
Bo, you graduated in 2008.
Assuming the sky is falling.
When the city was burning around you at the time. So you're a natural pessimist.
Yep, you nailed it.
I think there's a lot to be learned about it. But the reality, bottle this up, because there really is a lot to be learned. And that's why I love that we're focusing on this, because the first thing we ought to jump into is really, how do you focus on this? And the first thing I think you should focus on in your 20s is, are you keeping your job?
Yeah, first you got to get a job, right? So if you're in your early 20s looking for a job, it's getting that very first job. And then once you're in there, one of the big things that you ought to focus on through this recessionary period is, how do I keep my job? What are the things that I can do to make sure that I stay employed? Because unfortunately, the fact of the matter is, during a recession, when there are reductions in force, when there are layoffs, you might likely be one of the most at-risk employees at your employer.
Yeah, it's unfortunately, employers typically go with like a LIFO employee situation, where it's last in, first out, because you're the least amount of experience. So you do need to pay attention. And we even asked, we said, hey, Daniel, go find us some research. I want to know, is this the reality? And unfortunately, it is. Look at the difference employment rate of young college graduates from 1979 to 2019. And when we hit that Great Recession, that 2008, 2009, unfortunately, people in their 20s, that first job, your jobs fell off like a cliff.
So I would make sure I'm not doing things in my job that might draw negative attention to myself. I want to make sure I'm adding value. I want to make sure I'm learning, I'm constantly advancing, I'm doing things like showing up on time, not taking advantage of maybe flexibility and freedom that my employer is giving me, so that I can try to be as sticky as possible. So number one thing to focus on, get and keep that job. Here is the second thing I would encourage folks in their 20s to think about. Do you have cash on hand to handle emergencies? This is that place where you just want to make sure you have saved enough. Your first few paychecks have come in. You've started to make quote unquote real money. You want to make sure you have enough in the bank to keep you from letting your financial life go into the ditch.
Well, this ties into the financial order of operations too, because we know, unfortunately, your peers, and this isn't just for people in their 20s, of Americans, somewhere between 56 to 60% consistently can't come up with $1,000. So you can really give yourself a tremendous head start if you can just make sure you have enough money to keep your financial life out of the ditch.
Because unfortunately, we don't know those unknown things that might come our way. And that emergency fund, the beginning of that emergency fund, is the thing that keeps you protected. So make sure you get and keep that job. Make sure you have cash to cover emergencies. And then the third thing is recognize that you have one of the most valuable resources in the world on your side, and that's time. Early on in your 20s, assuming that you do have stable employment, you have stable cash flow, right now you should think about starting that automatic wealth building process.
Yeah, I mean, it is. I felt like the first two were unfortunate because you are brand new, and sometimes that gives you just not the ability to have the staying power at either your new employer or even have the ability to have a lot of cash in the bank. But this is wealth building is so much easier the earlier you start. In your 20s, you have something that people in their 30s, 40s, and 50s don't have. And that's exactly what Bo said. Lots of time. Take advantage of it. Don't miss out on this opportunity. Because here's what I want you to understand. The cycle of market emotions. Realize you've never been through one of these downturns before. Everybody around you, the news media, your older peers at work, they're going to be scared. And that makes sense because they might have more money in the market. It's really scared. But I want you to know the bottom of the market, we're officially in bear market status now. So that means that there's a much more propensity that we're getting closer to the bottom than we are to falling down this thing forever. That's where the point of maximum financial opportunity is.
So what you need to do is, if you can, so long as you can control it, start that automatic process. You know, if you've listened to Warren Buffett at all, he says you want to learn how to be fearful when others are greedy and greedy when others are fearful. So if all you can do is start that Roth contribution and start doing $20 a month, your future self will thank you because you're getting those dollars working in this uncomfortable and volatile market. Maybe all you're doing is putting enough in your 401k to take advantage of the free employer match. That's great. Your future self will thank you for getting those dollars working. And this is the way it worked for me, Brian. When I first started my 401k and I first started contributing to a Roth, those dollars that I put to work in 2008 and 2009 during the last recession are some of the most powerful dollars in my entire army of dollar bills.
Yeah, so take advantage of step number 2 of the financial order of operations. Get that free employer match money. And then I like after you work through paying down the credit cards, you work through the cash reserves, take advantage of step 5 of the financial order of operations. Get that tax-free money, your Roth IRAs, your health savings accounts. That money is going to be tremendous in your long-term success.
All right, so we've talked about where you should focus on in your 20s. Now let's talk a little bit about what to forget. And I think this is a huge one, Brian, that you and I have both talked a lot about. Perhaps you need to forget the baggage that you brought into adulthood. Maybe it's those bad ideas that people in your life told you were truth that were not truth. I'm talking about things like this. Maybe the stock market is rigged only for the wealthy people, or investing is like gambling, right? You're just kind of throwing your money out there and taking risks. Or maybe you've heard someone say only the smartest people can make money in the market, so you have to learn how to time the market. And you shouldn't be investing now. You want to wait for the bottom so you can get in at the bottom and get out on the top. Some of those things that you have been told may not be true, and this is a great time for you to learn that so you can change that cycle.
Well, Bo, I'd like to build on, because I think a lot of people in the wealth building process, they tell you, hey, it's an overnight activity. I mean, and when there's all these distractions with crypto and everything else of all these people that made all this money really quick, loose, cut some corners. That's not the reality for the majority of the people. And you know, look, I have this koozie. And this is such a magical thing when we talk about the power of compounding growth, where we talk about $1 for a 20 to 21-year-old, 21-year-old because this is a beer can. $1 has the potential to turn into $88 by the time you reach full retirement age of 66 years old, 45 years in the future. What this doesn't show you, though, is the magic that goes on behind the scenes, because it's not a super fast process in the beginning. I think this is where a lot of people get frustrated. And we created an illustration to kind of show that wealth building in reality actually takes some time.
Yeah, if you think about that $1 that turns into 88, in the first decade of your working career, that $1 at age 20, by age 30 is only worth $3. That's not blowing your mind. That's not changing your life. But if you give it enough time, it gets more and more and more exciting. It's part of the path of that $1 turning into 88. But you have to give it enough time. I think a lot of folks are trying to go figure out, how do I do the get rich quick? How do I go buy the penny stocks? How do I get into the crypto at the perfect time? In actuality, that's not the way that wealth is built. It is a marathon, not a sprint. And you have to understand that going into it at the beginning.
Now, Bo, there is no way the closing point that I can steal your quote. But you did. I think this is a key thing, and I'll let you do the quote. Mm-hmm. But there is a key thing. We live in this new modern world where everybody is posting their life on social media. Mm-hmm. And there's a big stress point, I think, with a lot of people. You see it socially. You see it in the amount of people that are having mental health issues. Social media isn't necessarily the real world. What's your quote on this?
Social media isn't real. It's a highlight reel. And I think that's so true. What people put on social media is not a reflection of what's actually happening in their lives. It's the parts they want you to see. So when you see the young person driving the fancy car or going on the expensive trips or having the nice and fancy things, that is not reality. It is the image that they are trying to portray. Don't let yourself get lost thinking that you're doing something wrong, because you're building wealth the right way and you're slow and steady, making great decisions early on in your career that your future self will thank you for.
Yeah, I would also tell you, use this as a grounding moment. If you understand that social media isn't the reality of the world, figure out at a young age what your why, what brings you happiness are, because that's going to ground you and let you really focus on the goals that you should be working towards versus just the influences that might be distracting you from what you really need to be doing.